Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. The lust of men for women has long motivated men to take crazy and even irresponsible actions. But this lust has been at least comprehensible to society and in some ways useful to it, in a way that another lust that men sometimes feel sometimes is not, and that is the often unaccountable lust for battle. I believe that the figure of the Valkyria, the battle-determining woman in Norse mythology, is in some ways an origin, a physicalization of that lust for battle, which sometimes can seem as overpowering and maddening as a lust for a woman. Many Old Norse poems and sagas concern Valkyries. In Old Norse, Valkyrja, meaning dead body on a battlefield, Val, chooser, Kyrja, plural Valkyrjur. But one of the earliest that gives us a description of a Valkyrie, and that also has, I think, encapsulated within its first four stanzas, a really crisp, concise look at her major characteristics as she emerges in the poems and sagas, is Hrafnsmál, composed circa 900 by the Norwegian poet Thorbjorn Hornklovi for Harald Fairhair. This poem praises Harald Fairhair and his prowess as a warrior and war king by having a Valkyrie and a raven discuss his recent battles. Here are those first four stanzas in my unpublished English translation of this poem. Listen, ring-rich noblemen, while I tell of the feats of spears of wealthy Harald. I will speak of the words that I heard a blonde, bright-haired girl speak when she talked to a raven. That Valkyrie seemed wise. Men caused no stir in the heart of the snake-eyed woman who knew birds' language. The blonde-lashed, pale-throated girl greeted that eyeball-plucking raven where he sat on a mountain crag. How are you, raven? Where have you come from with bloody beak on the dawn of this day? Flesh dangles from your claws. Your breath stinks of corpses. I think you spent last night where you know some dead men lie. The gray-feathered bird, the eagle's own blood brother, stirred himself and wiped his beak at his feet. I followed Harald, he said, Halfdan's son, the young Yngling, ever since I left the egg. So here we have two figures who Norse poetry often associates with battle and its aftermath. The raven, because of course ravens, eagles, wolves, and other such scavenging animals of prey will prey upon the bodies upon a battlefield, and the Valkyrie because she is the chooser of the slain for Odin. And here we see she is depicted as a, quote, blonde and bright-haired girl. This associates her with the upper class. We notice that Valkyries are very frequently, very explicitly described as being upper-class women. These are not women of low or common social orders, but seem to be drawn exclusively from the nobility. We see in many other Norse sources a strong codification of social class by hair color. The best example of this is, of course, in the poem Ríkstula and the Poetic Edda, where we see blonde hair associated more with this upper class, as it is casually and formally alike in many other sources. She is called a, quote, snake-eyed woman who knows birds' language. This also increases her association with the upper class, and specifically with the family of the Volsungs, who often are said to have eyes with snake-like characteristics. In fact, Sigurður Ormur í Auga, snake in eye, is a descendant of the Volsungs through Ragnar Lothbrok, and Sigurður himself, the great dragon slayer, as well as his daughter Svanhildr, are said to have such fierce eyes that their enemies have difficulty facing them. Men cause no stir in her heart. Well, we also see that the Valkyries are not depicted as women who are particularly interested in men in general. Sometimes in one of these narratives, a Valkyrie will become very interested in a particular war leader. For instance, in the Helgi poems we see that. But with the very famous example of the Valkyrie Brynhildr or Sigurdriva in the Volsungs material, she's actually punished by being made to marry. And even though she does have a certain envious love for Sigurdur, it was not exactly that she loved this man that set her off upon the path that she was on, but rather her own independent, war-loving streak. So these are never damsels exactly, and they're certainly not simply sex objects, as I think sometimes our cultural atmosphere has made them. Again, we see her as blonde-lashed and pale-throated. These are more associations with the upper class, women who don't have to work outside, being nobler, better family extraction, wealthier family extraction, are going to be paler because they've not sunburned. And, of course, the very fact that she is talking with the raven at all, that she is showing this curiosity about where he's been, that he's found dead bodies, that he's satisfied, it seems like. It seems like she's perhaps on a hunt for somewhere or for some war leader who may provide her also with the bodies of the fallen, not for eating, but rather for bringing to Odin in Valhall, the place often known today in English as Valhalla. Now, the concept of the Valkyrie is actually probably older than the concept of Valhall. The word Valkyrie is found in an exactly cognate form in the closer related language Old English. This cognate word, Valkyrja, is formed exactly the same way from exactly the same Germanic elements and means chooser of the slain, the dead body on the battlefield. Unfortunately, in the Old English context in which this is preserved, it is just an Old English gloss on a Latin text that's being translated. It simply glosses a word for witch or some other female vexatious character. So it doesn't really tell us what the Old English concept of a Valkyrie might have been, but it does suggest that the concept is old enough that it actually precedes when Old English and Old Norse ceased to be one speech community, which one might place in the 300s AD or so. By contrast, the term Valhall, as I'm going to discuss in my series of videos about the afterlife when I do the second installment about that, which is exclusively about Valhall, this is probably a fairly late concept in the Norse mythological cosmos, as attested by the fact that in the earliest poem that mentions it, Atlakvida, the word Valhall simply means a human lord's hall. And it seems like in our very earliest sources that all the dead go to hell. So the Valkyrja may well actually be an earlier concept than the place where she brings the dead bodies. In which case it's a little bit difficult to understand what exactly her role was before she was incorporated into the Odin Valhalla mythos. But we do see a pretty consistent picture of women of noble extraction who are apparently human. They do not seem to be a different species. Rather, they seem to take upon some kind of mantle, of almost employment, certainly in our late sources, explicitly for Odin, which makes them the creature that is more than human, which is the Valkyrie. Now, what is the chicken and what is the egg? Is this a woman who is simply fated to be a Valkyrie forever? We don't exactly know, as we're never explicitly told how a woman becomes a Valkyrie, but we have some hints about that. Now, this is as good a place as any to pause and reflect on the fact that our sources of Norse myth are often conflicting and often very partial, in two senses of the word partial. For one thing, when these were myths current in the belief of living generations, there were no reasons to write them down. The runes were rarely used to write narratives. When they were typically burial occasions, and you never find anything very long written down in runes. And the culture as a whole during the Viking Age seems to have been quite content with keeping its literature oral. So by the time any of this is written down, it's being written down by Christians who already inherit a very partially preserved tradition, but then you get another kind of partiality. I am not one of the people who thinks that the quote-unquote Christian influence on our surviving Norse myths is too strong for us to to take the Eddas as evidence. But we have to remember that in their choices of what to preserve, they might have been influenced maybe not so much by Christianity as simply by what stories were most appealing to them. And we can see that the Volsung narratives were extremely appealing. We have all kinds of versions of those stories. And the Valkyries in the Volsung narrative, which are some of the most famous Valkyries in all of Norse literature, especially Brynhildr, are also somewhat influenced by the chivalric romance literature of knights and ladies that was coming in to Iceland from the continent. So we don't have a very quote-unquote pure look at the Valkyries. We certainly don't have a systematic look at them that says this is how you become a Valkyrie, this is what a Valkyrie does, this is a Valkyrie's lifespan, or anything like that. So we really have two hints in the Poetic Edda, I think, about something that might suggest a little bit of how women become a Valkyrie. In the poem Helreið Brynhildar, from the aforementioned Volsung material, the Valkyrie Brynhildr has died, and she has ridden to hell in a wagon that she was cremated upon. Notice, again, as I mentioned in my first afterlife video about hell and general concepts, that the afterlife is very physical, and people take physically with them what they were burned or buried with. In stanza 7, she tells about how she became a Valkyrie, or it seems like that's what she's telling about, but it's very difficult to understand because this is just a sort of an elusive brush over of what must have been a richer story if this story was told more richly in detail somewhere. Here's that stanza. I'll give it to you in Old Norse and in my English translation. Let hami vara hugfullur konungur, åtta systra und ek borit. Var ek vetra 12, ef thik vita lustir, ek ungom gram, eida seldak. A bold king let our skins, our 8 sisters, so of us 8 sisters, be born under an oak. So a king had 8 sisters, skins, whatever exactly this is to be interpreted as, be carried under an oak tree. I was 10 winters old, if you want to know, when I gave oaths to a young prince. This seems to have something to do with her origin as a Valkyrie, because we read about the Valkyries having a hamr, or skin, of feathers or otherwise swan-like appearance in another poem, Volundarkvida, or actually in the prose material that precedes the poem Volundarkvida. But notice how elusive this is and how difficult it is to understand what's happening. Who is the king who had these skins born under an oak? What exactly is the ritual or ceremony that's being conducted here? Is the king who is having these skins born under the oak tree the same as the young prince that she gave the oaths to? What exactly are the oaths that she gave? And what is the relationship of this young prince to Odin, who seems to be the master of the Valkyries in most of the explicit material about them? Very difficult to conclude anything based on this. But I'll read you also the prose material from the first part of Volundarkvida. So Volundarkvida is a very old poem about the hero Volundr, a smith who is said to be an elf. And he and his brothers marry, or really abduct, Valkyries at the beginning of their story. That particular part of the story is not told in this very old poem. This poem may well be from the 800s. It's probably not quite as old as Atlakvida and Hrafnsmál, but it's quite old. Unfortunately, this part of the story is not told in that poem. It's told in the prose introduction that is written for the poem in the Codex Regius of the Poetic Edda. So who knows exactly how old it is. With prose, you always have to be more worried about that than with poetry. But here's the relevant part from that prose introduction. Snemma of morgun fundu þeir og vatnsstrondu, Konrþjór og spunnu Þar voru hjá þeim oftar hamir þeirra. That voru Valkyrjur. So early in the morning, they found on the lakeside 3 women, and they were spinning linen. Next to them were their swan skins, oftar hamir. These were Valkyries. Now, the men are going to take these swan skins and force the women to marry them. And then, after 7 years of this, the women are going to take their skins back and go back to being Valkyries. They're going to go back to judging fates. Urlog Drygja, says stanza 1 of the poem itself of Valkyrie. So, it is possible, perhaps, that the Valkyrie's power as a Valkyrie per se has something to do with this garment, which may be a swan skin. This may perhaps be her means of flying, since Valkyries do clearly fly over battlefields and fly when they take men to Valhall. It may also impart on her some other abilities, but it can be stolen from her as well, and this seems to remove her powers as a Valkyrie, at least if we are reading a little bit between the lines of the story in Valkyrie and the associated prose. I think that's pretty interesting, and it reminds us that the Valkyrie is not a separate species, but rather an empowered human being, or empowered Jotun. By the way, in the saga of the Volsungs itself, the mother of Volsungur, who is then himself the grandfather of the great hero Sigurdur, she is a Valkyrie. She's called an Óskmói, wish girl, which is a common name for Valkyries, especially in their relationship to Odin. And she is also said to be the daughter of a Jotun. So it's not just human women who can take on this mantle, but also apparently Jotnar, or Jotun women rather. And of course, I should also point out in that same breath that there's no record of a male Valkyrie. The word is grammatically feminine. You could hypothetically conceive of a masculine equivalent of Valkyrja, which would be something like Valkyrie, but that is never attested. There's no hints whatsoever that men can fulfill this position. It is somehow exclusively the domain of women. Now next, what I want to look at are the preserved names of Valkyries, both in the lists of Valkyrie names in the Poetic Edda and in some of the most famous narratives about them, because I think that these may shed some light on early conceptions of their roles, and as well on what looks to me like a strong connection of the Valkyrie with the goddess Freyja. 2 poems in the Poetic Edda purport to contain the names of Valkyries. In Hrafnsmál, stanza 36, it is Odin himself who names some of them. Hrist och mist vilekat mer hornberry, Skeggjold och skogul, Hildur och Þrúður, Hlokk och Herfjotur, Goll och Gerolul, Randgríð och Róðgríð, Reginleif, Þær bera einherjum ól. The names we see here are Hrist, Shake, Mist, Mist, Skeggjold, Axe Age, incidentally also the name of one of the terrible ages that is coming for us on Earth during Fimbulvetr, the terrible winter before Ragnarok. Skogul, perhaps something like projector. Hildur, very common woman's name or element in women's names, meaning battle. Þrúður, strength, especially with a sense of supernatural strength. Hlokk, which is the cry of an eagle. Herfjotur, which you could read as war fetter or chain, as well as war wife. I think the latter is a little more likely there. Gol, noise. And then gerolul is probably a copier's error for gerskogul, which is a name for a Valkyrie in Völuspá. Gerolul is difficult to make any sense out of, but gerskogul would be something like spear projector. Then we have randgríðr, that would be shield eager. Róðgríðr, advice eager. Reginleif, divine survivor or remnant. So altogether here we have I wish that Hrist and Mist bring me my horn. Skeghild and Skogul, Hildir and Thrúðr, Hlokk and Herfjotur, Gol and Gerolul, Rangríðr and Róðgríðr and Reginleif, they bring the Einherjar ale, or beer. The Einherjar being the dead men who inhabit Valhall with Odin. Then in another poem in the Poetic Edda, in the famous Völuspá, the Volva who is narrating the beginning and end of the world, in stanza 30, according to the Codex Regius recension of Völuspá, she gives us some names of Valkyries as well. So hon Valkyrjur vit komnar, gorvar at rida til godþjóðar, skuld helt skildi, en skogul onor, Gunnar, Hildir, Gondul og Gerskogul. Nú eru taldar nonor herjans, gorvar at rida grund, Valkyrjur. So names we see here are skuld, which would be cognate with the English word should, implying debt or necessity. This is also the name of a Norn. We have the three Norns, the three goddesses who determine fate, Urður, Verdandi, and Skuld. Snorri, in his Prose Edda, interprets this as meaning that one of the Norns, in fact, rides with the Valkyries sometimes. That is a possible interpretation. Of course, a Valkyrie and a Norn might have the same name, too. Or, it's quite possible that there was, in fact, no systematic difference between these groups of divine or semi-divine female beings. It's just hard to say based on the hints that we have here. And another is Skogul, that would be something like projector. Gunnar, battle. Hildir, battle. Both of these very common in women's names. Gondul is an interesting word. There's a couple different ways you could go with this. One is to relate it to a word for magical staves, Gandr, which you do see, for instance, in the name Gandolfr, Gandalf, something like magic staff elf. Actually not an uncommon name in the Old Norse world. Also, Gandr can be a wolf in, or monster in a mythic context. So, for instance, we see that one of the names of the serpent that encircles the earth is Jormun Gandr, great monster. So, what exactly is meant here? It could have a sense of, and the ul you can just take as a feminizing suffix to be simple about it. So is she sort of the monstrous one? Is she sort of the magical one? Is she associated with the wand or the spear, perhaps? This is an interesting name, and it comes up once again here in just a moment. And then Gerskogul, which I mentioned, is probably also originally intended to be in Hrafnsmál too. That's spear projector or something like that. So this stanza says, she saw Valkyries come from widely around, ready to ride to the god nation. Skuld held a shield, and Skogul was another one. Gunnar, Hildir, Gondul, and Gerskogul. Now the girls of Herjan, of Odin, are counted, ready to ride the earth, the Valkyries. But these two lists in Hrafnsmál and Völuspá don't encompass all Valkyrie names, and in fact, the most famous Valkyries are the Valkyries of the Volsung material. First of the Helgi poems, where we meet Svölva, meaning something like put to sleeper. That may seem weak, but in fact, Old Norse poetic language often sort of grimly, jokingly refers to death as sleep. We also see in Njol's saga there's a sword named Fjórsvölvnir, life sleep maker, put to sleeper, so life ender. She is then, well, that's in the Helgakvíða Hjörvarssonar poem. Then in the Helgakvíða Hundingsbana poems 1 and 2, the Valkyrie is named Sigrun, so that is victory rune, or victory mystery. And in the Saga of the Volsungs itself, we meet Brynhildr, armor warrior, something to that effect. That's actually not an uncommon woman's name, but in some of the early poems, specifically in Sigurdrífumál, in the Poetic Edda about the Volsungs material, the Valkyrie who has her lines is called Sigurdrífa, victory driver, i.e. the one who drives victory, perhaps chooses victory or makes victory happen. It's unclear whether Sigurdrífa and Brynhildr were understood to be different Valkyries in some traditions or not. But I want to draw your attention particularly to the name Gondul, which I said is a little bit mysterious in its origin. It also comes up as a name of the goddess Freyja in a strange source, a story called Sorlaþottr, written down circa 1390 in the manuscript called Flateyjarbók. Now, this beautiful manuscript is quite late, and it contains a much expanded version of the saga of Olavr Tryggvason, the first missionary king of Norway who also converted Iceland, and was later revered in his memory was revered in Iceland for being the one who had accomplished the conversion of the country. And in this expanded version of his story, there are many þættir, so literally threads, but short stories that are added in, some of which have interesting mythological information that seems quite old, and Sorlaþottr is one of those. In this story, which I've alluded to elsewhere, Freyja, the well-known Vanir goddess, is Odin's concubine, and she, in a story that's a little bit secondary to talking about Valkyries, gets a necklace from some dwarves by sleeping with them as the price. Odin is upset about this and has Loki steal it from her, and when she goes to get it back from Odin subsequently, I'll just read you my translation of this story, my unpublished translation of this part. She asked him to give it back to her. Odin said she would never get it back because of how she had acquired it. Unless you can accomplish this: make 2 kings, each one of them served by another 20 kings, become enemies, and curse them so that they will always stand up again and fight after they fall, unless a Christian man is so brave and followed by so much luck from his king. All right, blah, blah, blah. This is the part where it connects to Olaf Tryggvason because it's one of his Christian men who comes and breaks up this never-ending battle. Well, who is going to never-endingly battle but a certain King Heaven, and who should then appear to him on the road but a tall, beautiful woman calling herself Gondul? Now, she seems quite invested in getting him to go battle against his enemy, Hogni. She tries to convince him that Hogni is claiming to be a greater king than he, but he just peacefully goes to Hogni and resolves that with him. Then she gives him a horn full of a drink that makes him forget this, and then she says, hey, Hogni has a better wife than you. And Heaven says, well, then I will ask for his daughter's hand in marriage. And she says, no, that would make you less than him. Finally, she convinces him to go and fight Hogni, and the battle lasts forever, just as Odin stipulated. They continue to kill each other and be reborn. It's sort of like a Valhalla on Earth, a little bit more fearsome than a heaven on Earth, huh? But this Gondul must be Freyja, and so I have wondered, is Freyja actually a Valkyrie, perhaps the head Valkyrie in some ways? I do think that Freyja has probably absorbed a lot of other female figures over time. I mean, you see this in a lot of religions, a lot of mythological systems where some particularly prominent goddess basically absorbs all the other goddesses over time. I mean, this happens with Isis in Egypt, absorbing the functions of Serket, for example. But it seems like perhaps there is a chief Valkyrie, Gondul, whose role Freyja has absorbed by a certain point in the Norse mythological tradition. Another thing that connects Freyja to the Valkyries is the statement in the poem Hrafnsmál, when Odin is describing the different halls of the different gods and goddesses. In stanza 14, he mentions Freyja, and here's what he says there. Folkvangar níundi, en þar Freyja ræður sessa kostum í sal. Holvan val hon kus hverjan dag, en holvan Odin å. Let me translate this completely exactly literally for you. Folkvangar, army plain, is the 9th hall, and there Freyja, she rules the choice of seats in the hall, i.e. she arranges who sits where. She chooses each day half the dead in battle, Holvan Val, and Odin owns half. Is she in fact then, again, chief Valkyrie choosing half, and is Folkvangar just Valhall? After all, if Freyja and Frigg have merged or were once merged or whatever the case is, Freyja may well be Odin's wife. I don't believe for a second that Other is a different person than Odin, who is always taking different names, but that's kind of a subject of another video. So she would arrange the seats in Odin's hall, and all that we see here isn't any suggestion. Snorri makes this into a whole separate afterlife when he's talking about the afterlife in the Prose Edda. All we see here is there's a place called Folkvangar, which might be Valhall, or might be like a secondary Valhall, but it doesn't seem all that separate from Valhall. And we see that Freyja chooses half the dead who fall in battle. That doesn't necessarily mean she's taking them somewhere other than Valhall, or that she's serving a function other than that of a Valkyrie, of whom she may in fact be the chief. Now, why am I so compelled to make this case for Freyja and her deep connection with the Valkyries? Well, I think that it subverts some of our expectations about Freyja, because we so often want to put these labels of roles on the gods. We want to say Freyja, well, she's the goddess of love. Odin, well, he's the god of poetry. Thor, well, he's the god of storms, or something like this. But these titles, these roles, are useless in really discussing the primary sources of Norse myth. And Freyja, yes, could justly be described as a goddess of love if you have to give her a title like that. But I think that part of what's happening here is that the Valkyrie figure is, in a sense, a love figure herself. She is also sexualized like Freyja is. Freyja is an object of sexual affection for all of the gods, all humans, all elves, according to Lokasenna, all the Jotnar. And their lust for her often drives them to do crazy things, like the builder who wants Freyja at the beginning of time and is induced to build the wall around Osgarður against his own interests as a Jotun, believing that he'll receive her as his prize. Or the Jotun Thrymr, who in Thrymskvida steals Thor's hammer because he thinks that he can get the gods to bring Freyja to him as his bride to return Mjolnir. And similarly, that lust for Freyja is kind of reflected in the way that men go off to battle, that the women in their lives may not wish for them to. Now, sometimes in the sagas, the women are actually the ones who try to get men to fight. So, particularly in the sagas of Icelanders, women are often the ones who are inciting men to remember their family connections that should compel them to take blood vengeance or something like that. But mostly, women are sort of presented as being in this opposite sphere, this opposite world from men. So, for instance, in the poem Hrafnsmál, attributed to Ragnar Lothbrok, several times he compares fighting to being the opposite of hanging out with attractive women. It's like, this battle was not at all like kissing a pretty young widow on your lap, that sort of thing. So women are often sort of put aside there, but the compulsion to possess a woman has some similarities sometimes to the compulsion men feel to engage in battle, and I think that's sort of what the Valkyrie images. Notice that she is often what the hero is fighting for, at least in the material about the Volsung heroes. Helgi, in every one of the 3 versions of his story, fights another man who his Valkyrie lover's husband had promised her to, and she's the one who incites him to do it. We also see Gondel, who is probably Freyja, and Sorlathottir, as I mentioned, her astonishing beauty that's reported is part of what convinces Hethen to do what she says. And we see that in the rich material about the Volsungs, that these Valkyries may be looked at as rivals by other women in the heroes' lives. So for instance, in Gudrun Kvíða 1 in stanza 24, I'm just going to do the rest of these in my published English translation. I'm already testing you good folks' patience enough with the length of this video. Then Gulrún, daughter of Giuki, spoke. She's speaking to Brynhildr. This is after the death of Sigurður, the man that Brynhildr and Gudrun both loved. And it is Brynhildr's jealousy, ultimately, that has killed Sigurður. Silence, you curse on this people. No more of these words. You have always caused misery for our noble family. Everyone wishes you a bad end. You have been the sorrow of 7 kings and the betrayer of all women. Well, we don't know who all of these 7 kings are, but things like this are said about Brynhildr elsewhere, that she has caused the death not just of Sigurður, but of other men, perhaps in her role as a Valkyrie, perhaps like with Sigurður in her role as a, as what do you even call that, something like jilted lover. But this sense that Gulrún, who's Gudrun's sister, the wife of Sigurður, is accusing Brynhildr of being this sort of lure toward, out of the realm of women. But what is strong enough to lure men out of the realm of women? What's strong enough to lure a man out of the embrace of a beautiful woman? Well, maybe these battles that keep luring men away are sort of being visualized as being these sort of rival but supernatural women, is ultimately what I'm saying. We also see some discussion of Valkyries as being these sort of femme fatale figures elsewhere. In the poem Greipespál, when Sigurður is having his future foretold to him by his uncle Greipir, Greipir mentions Brynhildr, and he says this in stanza 29. That beautiful woman who is growing up at Heimirs will deprive you of all of your happiness. She will make you sleepless. She will make you senseless. You'll pay attention to nothing unless you're with that girl. So emphasizing her desirability, which is something that of course can make men crazy, just as the lust for battle perhaps can. And whenever our heroes encounter Valkyries for the first time, that is almost always just what is instantly on their mind. They want the woman. When Sigurður first meets Sigurdrifa or Brynhildr, depending on which tradition of this you're following, in her burning ring of fire, he wants advice from her, and he wants her. When Helgi first meets his Valkyrie lover, for instance in Helgi Kvíða Hjörvarssonar, stanza 7, here she has given him a name. He has not been named yet by his parents, and he says, "You name to me Helgi. What gift will you give to accompany my name-giving, you lovely woman? I think you know what everyone's names are, but I will not accept my name unless I get you as a gift along with it." Right? He's instantly turning this into working her. Right? He wants her bad. And it seems like our heroes who want to fight more than anything, who want to go to Valhall, which is a place actually truly far removed from the world of the pleasures of women, may have been conceived of as being driven by a lust that was just as powerful as the lust for women. And how can that be imaged but in the image of a beautiful woman? Well, I hope this has given you kind of a different spin on the notion of a Valkyrie, as I think my ideas about this have evolved quite a bit over the years as I've read more and read more deeply, especially in some of the heroic sagas and poems. My videos, which are the product of, what is it now, 12 years of teaching Norse mythology at various universities in the United States, are made for free in beautiful places in my Rocky Mountain homeland of Colorado and Wyoming. But my videos are supported by generous donations from my community of Patreon supporters, and I encourage you to join them if you'd like to help me keep making these series. Now that I've switched to a once-a-week update of Old Norse material on Wednesday, what other day could I choose for that, I think that there's going to be more of these deep dive, real meat and potatoes videos like this. So if you enjoyed this, I think you're going to get more of the same sort of thing as 2019 unfolds. For now, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.